Well, hey everybody, it is Romania Black, and we're on episode 17 of the Apothecary Diaries, and I'm so glad I did not have to wait long to get to this episode. Luckily, by the time I watched episode 16, I only had to wait a couple of days before the comments were ready to go, and I was like, okay, good. So we have comments to talk about. We have the rest of chapter 9 of The Last Eunuch of China to talk about. There's just a lot of things to get through before we start this episode, so this intro, as per usual, might be a little bit long, but y'all seem okay with that, so we're just gonna go with it. I do want to go ahead and talk about the comments first. H Banana 7 talked about how there are currently actually 2 mangakas working on this series. It doesn't bother me to not know the particulars about it, but H Banana 7 was pointing out how there are 2 mangakas. So the whole thing with the prison sentence, the tax evasion with one versus the other. I know there had been a lot of talk supposedly about what will happen with the manga, but and people in Discord have been talking about that early on, but I feel like, honestly, I think they have enough content because they've announced season 2 already. They have enough content for season 2, and then it's like, it'll be fine. They'll get to it. So we'll just have to wait and see how that goes and go from there. Be Happy and talked about, we were talking in the Discord because I talk with the moderators quite a bit, and Be Happy is the moderator for this series. And they were asking at the time what if I could learn about certain things with the series that I might have been confused about. It's always such a delicate balance when you're a content creator because you want to be surprised and not be spoiled, but then it's like, where do you draw the line at finding out new things? So there is something I'm supposed to remind Be Happy about when it gets close to the season finale, and they're going to bring it up for me to speculate on with you all before the season finale happens. Whatever that may be, we'll wait and see. But they were talking about how basically I had been confused about Jinshi being a eunuch or not, and about the whole brother situation with the emperor. And they pointed out that the brother being the excuse in episode 5, the emperor and his close people gave, the brother being in poor health was the excuse in episode 5 that the emperor and his close people gave to everyone about the brother not being seen in public. Which means, technically, not a lot of people know that Jinshi is royalty. And that confused, now that I talked with the moderators about it, that I guess is what had confused me the most leading up to it, because I get MaoMao being oblivious and not getting that he's the emperor's brother. I get it. She doesn't pay attention to some things. If it doesn't involve poisons or poisonous plants or anything related to her detective work, she's like, it kind of goes in one ear out the other. So I understand her not recognizing that he's the emperor's brother. I get that. But I told the moderators in the episode, Jinshi was wearing royal robes. He had a royal hairpin in his hair. He was walking around in front of Gyokyo and the ladies in waiting. The military men know that he's working there in the outer palace. I'm like, how do they not know he's the brother? Like, he's wearing the royal family robes. Not everybody gets to wear that. I was like, what? And they were like, moderators like, I don't know. It's a weird choice. I'm like, yeah, this series is so smart. That's the one decision this series has made that I'm like, that doesn't make any sense at all. And so, because he was out in public that day, like walking around, he wasn't like hiding in the chamber or whatever, pretending to be sick. He was walking in front of everybody. I'm like, what is going on? Or at least don't wear royal robes if you're going to do that. It was a very weird decision. And I don't know if the anime just didn't catch that or I don't understand it. Anyway, and then Gaoxun was remarking how he forgot to take off his high status hairpin. So people know the rules of the palace and they know all the signs. So I didn't know if the show messed up or if it was just a confusing moment, which it was way back in episode 5, so it's fine. But I was just like, I think that's what confused me the most, because I'm like, well, I get how MaoMao missed the clues, but how did everybody else? So anyway, but who knows? That was all in the past, but I was just like, it has been bothering me all season. And finally, the moderator and I could talk about it, and I was like, okay, now it makes sense. And then Anime Annie points out that the money that MaoMao owes the Madame, this is before episode 12, is to cover the cost of Lihaku's night with Peirin. She handed over the money that she had saved so far when she visited, but the Madame said it wasn't enough. And then I'm assuming Jinshi covered the rest of that in episode 12 because the lady in the brothel is like, oh, all this extra gold. So I'm wondering if he paid for the rest of it or just paid to take MaoMao back to the palace. Because MaoMao seems to be still trying to pay things off, so I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. But anyway, I really appreciated those comments, so thank you. As far as the last eunuch in China goes, the rest of chapter 9 was pretty interesting. So basically on page 211, we're actually getting to the last part of the book, which is interesting to me. So basically, Sun Yao-ting, he's working for the emperor. They're currently in Manchukuo, where the Japanese is occupying. And basically, he gets to the position where he can serve Puyi, who is the former emperor, who's now been inserted as the puppet emperor. That's the title they call him in Manchukuo. So basically, some of the other eunuchs, they don't exactly treat him very well, which is interesting because back at the beginning of the story, Sun Yao-ting was treated very well. And here, a lot of the other eunuchs are a little bit jealous of him because he has favor with the emperor. And they're like, especially when the emperor has such a temper, that they kind of are jealous that Sun Yao-ting is not, being hurt in any way, shape, or form. So anyway, they're cleaning the rooms and everything. And what ends up happening is that one of the eunuchs, his name is Duo, he actually tells Sun Yao-ting that he needs to go clean the windows. Well, we find out that Sun Yao-ting has a fear of heights. He's really afraid of heights. And the eunuch, Duo, he basically is like, I don't care, go up and clean them. You've been ordered and I'm higher than you. And so Sun Yao-ting goes up there, but he gets up onto basically this little beam above the windows, and he looks down and he gets scared and he can't come down. And it's really sad. Like, I felt so embarrassed for him because he's up there. And the other eunuchs note that he wets his pants. He basically urinates over himself because he's so scared. And Puyi, the emperor, finds out, and he has them lower down Sun Yao-ting and help him get down. And all the other eunuchs kind of they note that he's wet himself and he's scared. And Puyi is like, why would you make him go up there and do that? That was stupid. And so he ends up punishing Do for not listening to Sun Yao-ting and making him go up there, which was kind of nice. But then you find out what that involves. And basically what happens is Do is sent to the dark room. He is sent to the dark room, which is where you have a period of confinement for minor offenses. And then he's required to write a letter of repentance upon his release. And so he asks Sun Yao-ting for help because Duo, the eunuch that got both of them in trouble, Sun Yao-ting gets in trouble because he couldn't clean the windows. Duo gets in trouble because he put him up there to begin with. So he tells Sun Yao-ting he doesn't know how to write. He's illiterate. And Sun Yao-ting writes the letter for him. And so then this other eunuch named Yan, who's just a bitch, comes out and he slaps Sun Yao-ting and he's like, why'd you write the letter for him? And Sun Yao-ting is like, well, he couldn't write the letter. And so he asks him to recite what he wrote, and Sun Yao-ting does that. And he's like, well, how was I supposed to write it? And he said, well, you said things in Duo's favor. You should have written down whatever he has to say. And Sun Yao-ting's like, I wrote exactly what he told me. What did I do wrong? And so the emperor manages to hear back on it, and he kind of laughs it off, and he's like, oh, look at you. He says, Chun Shao, which is his other name, he says, I didn't realize you're so talented. You know how to write a letter of repentance. Not bad at all. And Sun Yao-ting says, what your slave wrote is sheer nonsense. And Puyi, Sun Yao-ting, who used to really like the emperor, knows that the emperor is very volatile and very easy to make angry. So he's just agreeing with whatever he says and please don't hurt me. And Puyi just laughs and walks away. So then, which is here's the messed up thing about it all, right? So Sun Yao-ting, he has been working for the emperor for years and years. And it's so weird because sometimes the Emperor Puyi will show favoritism a little bit to him and be nice to him and kind of let him off. And then other times you quickly realize that no matter what happens, Sun Yao-ting is in some regard kind of boxed in because of his label as a eunuch. And we see that happen in this portion here where it says, sometimes Puyi seemed to show a little partiality towards Sun Yao-ting, who used to wait on Wanrong and therefore knew the rules and service procedures better than many eunuchs. When fruit boxes were laid on the table in the evening, Puyi might call over to him saying, hey, would you like some of these? They're sweet. So he starts to give he gets these fruit boxes and everything in, and he starts to let Sun Yao-ting taste all the fruits and everything in the box. And Sun Yao-ting's like, oh, cool, that's nice. He thought that was really sweet of him. He's like, you can eat as much as you like, but remember, the fruits are mine, but the stomach is yours. So it seems like he's doing everything really being kind of nice to Sun Yao-ting for all of his service. Like, he gives him sweets, he gives him fruit boxes. He even, like, the pond freezes over where the palace is and they go ice skating, and he invites Sun Yao-ting to come with him and Wanrong to go ice skating, which, by the way, Wanrong's still around. She had this baby, but the emperor's keeping her there in the palace. It's awkward, but they all, like, go out together, and Sun Yao-ting starts to think that maybe, you know, there is some kind of like friendship developing there against all odds. Then a few months later, a box comes in and he has Sun Yao-ting like taste all of the cookies and the fruit from it, an apple, a pear, and a few Japanese fruits. Sun Yao-ting finished everything with gusto and kowtowed to thank Puyi for a special favor. But Puyi had a strange look in his eyes. He scrutinized Sun Yao-ting as if he were waiting for something to happen. Several of his nephews who were present also looked at Sun Yao-ting in the same quizzical manner. It took Sun Yao-ting a long time to realize what had happened on that day. For fear that the Japanese might want to poison him with the cookies and fruits, Puyi wanted someone to taste them first. And a eunuch was, of course, more expendable than his own nephews. The rage and indignation Sun Yao-ting felt could only be expressed in hushed whispers when he was totally alone. So, like, in that moment, he realizes that after all these years, after everything he's done, and after all of this relationship he's developed alongside Puyi, at the end of the day, he still, like, put Sun Yao-ting there being like, you taste all this first, and if you die, oh well. And it just, like, it's so sad, because in that moment, it just reinforces that no matter all they went through and how much Sun Yao-ting has, like, worked for him, at the end of the day, it's still, like, a master-servant relationship. And it's like, anyway, so these people visit from America, from Chicago. Dr. Everett and his wife come to visit them, which is so random. But Mrs. Everett, she seems to get along great with the emperor, and they have a good old time. And so then other people come to visit the emperor while he's there in Manchukuo. One is the uncle from the very beginning of the story, the first person that ever employed Sun Yao-ting. He shows up. And Sun Yao-ting kind of gets in trouble with the emperor because the emperor's like, well, the emperor gets jealous after everything that's just happened. The emperor gets jealous that his uncle is showing favoritism towards Sun Yao-ting. But luckily, nothing ends up happening from it. So Sun Yao-ting ends up getting promoted. He gets promoted to actually being not a taster for poison like MaoMao is, but they establish that he's given the job of walking with the servers from the kitchen to the emperor to make sure that along the way, nobody poisons the plates along the walkabout, which is very interesting. And they talk about how the emperor used to have like so many dozen dishes per meal, and now he has like 10 dishes per meal. And I was like, that's still 10 dishes per meal. It's still a lot. But basically, Sun Yao-ting's new job is to make sure that nobody poisons the food along the way, which is a high stakes job, right? So anyway, we do find out about the man with Wanrong. So basically what ended up happening, we found out she got pregnant a few chapters ago and had a kid, and the emperor was pissed about it. So what ended up happening was that Wanrong had not been able to get with anybody. Her and the emperor's relationship was pretty stagnant. And so it said, Sun Yao-ting held that Puyi should take the blame for what happened. Deprived of her conjugal rights because Puyi was either unable or unwilling to fulfill the duties of a husband, Wanrong sought solace elsewhere. In great distress, she took to opium smoking and soon became addicted. Meanwhile, Puyi was reputedly having clandestine relationships with several eunuchs and male attendants. This is where it gets messed up. And I was like, what? One of his favorites was Li Tiu, a handsome male attendant who had entered the palace as a child. He took Li to Manchukuo and had him keep night watch in the medicine room next to Wanrong's bedchamber. According to the rumors, Puyi had set them up in order to silence Wanrong, who was probably aware of his sexual eccentricities. Anyway, Wanrong and Li Tiu fell for each other and carried on until she got pregnant. Late one night, Yan, the one eunuch, and his men waited outside the door of Wanrong's bedchamber and caught Li walking out in his underwear, and they took him to the emperor. Your Majesty, let's shoot him, the eunuch suggested. The Japanese soldiers would rush in at the gunshot, Puyi said. That would be difficult to handle. How should we deal with him then? The attendants asked eagerly, ready to spring on Li and beat him to a pulp. Let him go. The attendants could hardly believe their own ears. What? Let him go, Puyi, the emperor, repeated, and then disappeared into the inner room. And that was the end of the incident. So basically, Li Tiyu, who is being a bisexual trouble in the palace, was not only reportedly, and as rumor has it, having affairs with Puyi, but ended up having affairs with Wanrong and getting her pregnant. So, and Puyi, whether he, still liked Li Tiyu and just was like, whatever, or whether he felt bad that he was unable to be with Wanrong, whatever the case may be, it just ended up going over. So, anyway, we have the idea that Sun Yao-ting starts to go and be one of the people that walks to make sure that Puyi's meals are not poisoned. He also teaches some of the other eunuchs how to do things around the house. However, what ends up happening is that he notices one of the eunuchs doing something wrong, and he knows that eunuch will get onto him and yell back at him, so he decides to just let it go, which I don't kind of blame him. He was like, the eunuch was doing something wrong, but it wasn't my business, so I'm not going to say anything. But a bunch of the other eunuchs notice that Sun Yao-ting doesn't correct him, so they go and tell the emperor, and what ends up happening is, while they're telling the emperor what's going on, one of the eunuchs takes it upon himself and starts beating Sun Yao-ting's hands until they turned black and blue. So around this time, after that, what ends up happening is that Sun Yao-ting, he ends up getting sick. They said he had attack of liver by blood heat. And I wanted to look this up real quick because I was like, what the heck is that? And what does it mean? Because I was like, what's going on? So it said attack of liver by blood heat. And I was like, what does that mean? And so it's chi stagnation, which I've seen through different Donmai. And it says attack of liver blood heat, known as liver fire, can cause a variety of symptoms such as skin itching, pain in the chest, acid reflux, and other symptoms. It can be prolonged. It can develop from prolonged liver stagnation, which can occur when the liver fails to regulate the free flow. To reduce liver heat, you can eat cooling foods or beverages, and blah, 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 blah. Well, whatever the case may be, his liver starts acting up and causing problems for him. And then Sun Yao-ting goes to a doctor in Japan. They send him to one of the Japanese doctors, not in Japan, but to one of the Japanese doctors there. And they basically tell him that he also might have lung disease. And so Sun Yao-ting's like, crap, I'm like not in good health. So what they end up doing is they're like, you can't work for the emperor right now. Your hands are messed up. You might have some lung or liver problems. You need to go back home and heal. And then if you get better, you can come back and serve the emperor again. So the emperor actually gives Sun Yao-ting $500 to go take care of his treatment and sends him along his way. And he goes back home. But when he arrives back home, it says Japanese troops in Jinshi County had shattered the peaceful life of the villagers. A few Japanese soldiers stormed into Sun Yao-ting's house and dragged away his younger brother, who was made to gather grass to feed the horses. Then came another team of soldiers armed with bayonets. They asked, do you have chickens? Do you have eggs? Having found none, they decided to take away a calf. But listening to the calf's mooing, Sun Yao-ting leapt to his feet to confront the Japanese soldiers. The calf is mine. You can't take it away. Well, who are you? Said the Japanese soldiers, pointing their bayonets at him. I'm a eunuch, said Sun Yao-ting. The calf is mine. Eunuch, what's that? The Japanese soldiers did not know enough Chinese to understand the word. Then an interpreter came in saying, what are you doing? Talking nonsense to the Japanese masters. I've come back from Manchukuo, Sun Yao-ting hastily explained. The Kangde emperor gave me $500 to treat my illness. They didn't believe him, so Sun Yao-ting hurried back into the house to get the certificate issued by Jishua, basically the person there that issued him. He's like, take a look at this. The Japanese soldiers peered into the paper and dropped their bayonets at once. They smiled at him and put up their thumbs. Sun Yao-ting reclaimed his calf and a donkey that the Japanese had taken away from another household. That next morning, the Japanese sent the interpreter to see Sun Yao-ting with a box of cookies. They wanted his second brother to be their road guide. Naturally, Sun Yao-ting dared not to refuse. So yeah, basically, he becomes known throughout town as the eunuch who dispelled the Japanese soldiers with a piece of paper. And it's like, so while he's healing up at home, he basically gets his reputation around him, but he slowly realizes as the chapter ends that he's like, I have to get out of here. He's like, or I'm going to become a collaborator of the Japanese sooner or later. So he decides to head back to Beijing to see if he can do anything and go from there. So crazy stuff. It feels so weird, like reading his perspective of being like, what do I do? But it was so sad the moment you realize that the emperor was going to throw him under the bus and make him test the stuff for poison after all they'd been through. And it was like, I felt for him. I felt for him a lot. But anyway, we've talked for 20 minutes. That's been long enough. So lots of theories surrounding Lakan. Last episode, we got to see the whole mystery with the 3 sons basically solved. Jinshi got to help out. And when we last left off the episode, Jinshi wanted MaoMao to help him with his makeup. Okay. I think he's going to go undercover as a courtesan and go into town to the Vergus house to go see what's going on, but I could be wrong. Anyway, we're going to find out. My dogs are probably going to be loud, but what can we do? So we're going to see what happens, and we're going to start episode 17 of the Apothecary Diaries, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Oh, well. What a jaunty little episode that we have here, don't we? Oh my gosh. So yeah, that was a really good episode. I'm honestly surprised it's a 2-parter. Well, maybe not a 2-parter. Maybe we're going to like start the next episode with how this one ends, being like, but interesting. So, okay. Well, let's go ahead and talk about this. I guess Jinshi gets his answer. He could have just asked the answer to this question back at the palace, but then we wouldn't have had to get them going on this cute little walkabout. So it had a very Aladdin feel to it, where Jinshi is kind of like Princess Jasmine, where she wants to go and visit, and MaoMao is kind of like Aladdin, the street rat, where they're like going out and like going around town. And I'm surprised MaoMao didn't take an apple and like kick it off her shoulder and Jinshi catch it, but that'd been too much. That might have been too much. She wanted to get leeks, and so she could have rolled a radish off her elbow and like kicked it to him, but we can't have nice things. So Lakan is, we'll talk about that. But I feel like my theories about him being MaoMao's father might be on the money. We'll just have to, he may be her father, but he's not her daddy. I will defend Loman to the end of time, so we'll have to get to that. But yeah, here's the thing, y'all know I have been comparing the Apothecary Diaries to another series that I'm watching, Scumville Self-Saving System, on this channel. It's on Mondays. You should go check it out. You will notice that. But I swear, MaoMao was acting just like the protagonist of any MXTX Danmai that I've ever read. If you're not familiar, Danmai is like Chinese BL, boys love, whatever, boys life, however you want to say it. And then all of the protagonists from this author, MXTX, all the protagonists, they are keenly aware of how handsome and attractive their potential partner is, but they act oblivious of it, even though they're saying it like it's the gospel. So MaoMao's sitting there going, God, he's so handsome. He's so objectively angelic. He was carved like marble statues during the Renaissance. We can't possibly make him ugly. He's going to be a hunk of man meat no matter where we go. I'm like, girl, recognize you're attracted to him. But honestly, what saves it is that I feel like MaoMao, in her obliviousness, that's just part of her personality, but it works perfect for Jinshi, because Jinshi is used to being surrounded by women who throw themselves at him, and he's like, I don't want that. And MaoMao's like the one person he can be a human around without her fawning over him, even though she objectively is like, he's really hot. So it's like, yes. So I love their dynamic that they have. It's just, she's so oblivious, and she's starting to connect the dots, but doesn't want to admit that she's connecting the dots. And he jumps to the wrong conclusions, and you're like, you're both bakas. There's like a meme on Facebook right now where it's like, are they lovers? No, worse, they're idiots. It's like, it fits these two so well, but I love their dynamic. It's like, it is going to be the longest will they, won't they in the history of manga. Maybe not the longest, but still. And so I was surprised we got CGI blue lock horses in this episode. The CGI horses in this opening shot, I get that it's only for one shot, so it's fine, but that threw me off. I was like, what is this? But it says there are many silly wars in history. Several of them are caused by beautiful women. I mean, Helen of Troy, am I right? And Jinshi, her imagining Jinshi as a beautiful woman, she's like, no, we don't need to subject the world to that. I love the idea that MaoMao's like, he would be a bisexual disaster and would cause the end of times. We need to not let that happen. If we put Jinshi in drag, it's over. It's over. It's too much power, too much sexiness on both fronts. We can't do it. We can't do it. The androgyny is too much. He does look a lot like Aduo whenever he has makeup on. Like, he looks like his mother to a scary extent. So it's like, damn. She's like, are you trying to not topple a nation or what? And she doesn't realize. He's like, what are you talking about? He's like, why does your imagination do that? And he's like, you know, how do you put makeup on with your freckles? I like that she is complimenting him and he doesn't get it. And I'm like, I'm like, you bakas, the both of you, absolute bakas. And she's like, oh, he wants to be ugly. She's like, I can do that. I do love that MaoMao not only explains the process of makeup and how it works, but I love that she's like, we could go all in. She's like, if I'm going to do this, we're going to go 120%. We're going to make it work. I love that she gets all on board with it. Now, she did talk about the lacquer, the permanent makeup, which is like inking and everything, but we're not worried about that. We're not going to let that be a bother. And so she's like, well, we can manage. We can make you look ugly, sir. We can at least try. So yeah, I love that she has like all the different tints. She has everything out. She is gonna go all in on this. Meanwhile, I love this Suiren. He's like, she shows up and he's like just posed, looking perfect. And she's like, it's like the opposite of you'll bring honor to us all from Mulan. She's like, this is what you give me to work with. Well, honey, I've seen worse. I love it. We're turning the silk purse into a sow's skin. We're like moving it backwards. We're doing our Uno reverse card. Also, the relationship between Suiren and Gaoshun was adorable. Like just these two essentially nannies to the emperor's son / technical brother. And they're both like, oh, what? Him and his toys. What's interesting is that Gaoshun, Suiren seems like she views MaoMao as a living toy still, but Gaoshun has kind of been like Jinshi moved on past that terminology because Gaoshun's like, he's awfully fixated on her and it's not my place to say what he should or shouldn't do, but she's become awfully important to him. Like the two of them get it. They get that he likes her. Suiren thinks it's more of a phase and that she's more of a toy, but Gaoshun's like, nah, we've moved past that phase. This isn't like what you're used to, Suiren. You've not been around these two long enough to realize that yet. But bless him. I love that he's so perfect and MaoMao's like, which is so good. Again, also her disdain at how beautiful he is. It kind of feels like Lakan. It feels like a reaction that her father would have, where when he sees things that are kind of beautiful, his eyes kind of twitch and he's like, I don't trust it. She has kind of the same reaction. It's not malicious like Lakan's is, but it is similar. And I'm like, and whenever the shadows, interestingly, are over her eyes, they are the same color as Lakan's. I'm like, yep. And he's like, why are you in such a bad mood in the morning? And it's like, it's like Jinshi doesn't realize her being in a bad mood is actually her being attracted to him. And she just, because whenever she's around other people, she just throws it off like it's nothing. She's like, oh, you're bothering me? Oh, no, we're fine. But because of him, she can't like shake it, right? She's like, I'm sure you're going to be beautiful all day. She's like, this is going to be a waste of my time. So yeah. And she's like, do you really want to become a different person? He's like, well, yes. And she's like, well, then let me. The moment she sniffed his palm and his wrist and like delicately held him, and Gaoshun and Suiren are like, oh my God, I live. I'm like, yes, it's basically like the kiss lip only in reverse. Like she Uno reversed that, took it right back. I'm like, girl, yes, give me this. I love them as a couple for it. And she's like, you don't stink enough. Commoners don't burn incense. She's like, your clothes smell too good. Get some BO and we can work with this. And plus, I like that she pointed out that showy scents are, point to rich people, but also people that might have venereal diseases, so they want to be avoided too. But you can't stink too much, so we've got to find a way to make you hit right in the middle so that you can pass yourself off as a commoner, but not someone that's non-approachable. So then he thinks back to Lakan telling him, like, you should find someone who knows about that world. And he's like, I wish he would have asked her about the brothel in the palace, but then they wouldn't have gotten to hang out together, so it's fine. So anyway, she manages, like, I like that poor Sweeren's like, you're gonna mess up his hair, and she's like, we gotta make it rough, we gotta make it look oily and greasy, like it's got some texture, it's too silky sheen, there ain't no Vidal Sassoon in the streets, girl. She's like, just put the salt in the hair. I totally get that because back when I was younger, it was like a trend of people to make like their hair have like beachy waves, which just basically means it's like tousled in the sand. It was a fad. It was a dumb fad, but people would spritz like salt spray into their hair to give it texture, and it would just crinkle your hair and dry it out. It was a fad for a while, and I was like, what a terrible idea at the time, and we still did it. But yeah. So she scrunches his hair up, ties it up with like just a rag. I love that Gao Shun's like, forgive me for bringing these BO ropes. And then they stuff them. This is the opposite of a drag race like makeover challenge. This is the opposite of it. This is like a drag race like make under challenge, like make them ugly. Like it's great. But okay. So the reason why in the reaction I said hello Akane is when she tells him to strip and he like gets down his ropes and he has all these abs. In the show Psychopaths, which I have reactions to on this channel, you should go check them out. One of the main characters, the main protagonist, Akane, she notices one of her male comrades and coworkers who I totally ship her with, that he has abs too, and she does the exact same thing that MaoMao does. And I was like, look at that, look at that. But yeah, and she's like, oh, he's got a lot of muscular physique. He looks like a heavenly maiden, but he has a well-balanced muscular physique, which, would be kind of odd for, and the way she scrunches her eyes and she's like, it's odd for a eunuch to have this. I'm like, girl, put two and two together. Her being an unreliable narrator is so baffling to me sometimes because she's so smart that you're like, well, she wouldn't get something that easy mixed up, so she has to be right. But it's like, she's a girl. Again, she doesn't want conjecture, but she's starting to see the evidence that would point to the otherwise. So they basically stuff him with towels, which is so funny, make him look a little bit heavier. And she's like, well, his face now looks too thin to match the body. We're trying to make him a bear, but he's got a beauty face to go with the bear body. So we got to himbo him up a little bit. We got to give him a little bit more of a dad bod and then chunk up his face a little bit. So why not? Give him some eye circles, a mole. I like that she tries to do the lipstick and he looks too pretty. She's like, nope, this was a mistake. Let's wipe that off there. But yeah, and so then she notices the calluses on his hands, which would be where he's held the sword. And she's like, well, why would a eunuch need to practice with swords? And I'm like, girl, figure it out. Both Jinshi and her are so smart, but yet oblivious in this episode. And I'm like, Also, I like that at least she points out he has manly hands. So that's good. So then she makes him drink this stuff. Now, she described it as being this mixture of, what'd she say it was made of? She said several different irritants. Like, it's really spicy, but it's not poison. I'm like, what if he was allergic to chili powder? What if he was allergic to one of those irritants and it made not only his voice rough, but his throat swell up? Girl. Anyway, and she's like, you're going to put cotton in your mouth to like make your cheeks puff out. It did work. He looked like a himbo. And then she's like, oh, damn it. She's like, he's still hot. She's like, it's the best I can do. She's like, some girl or guy is probably going to be into this dad bod, but what can we do? I'm waiting for, what's that artist? Umiko. She hasn't done any Apothecary Diaries art that I've seen, but I'm surprised. She likes to draw guys with dad bods with like little thicker around the middle bodies. I'm surprised she hasn't done something with this, but it's fine. So then Gao Shun's like, oh, hey. He's like, MaoMao, you're going back home. So Jinshi is supposed to be going to check and investigate some things. So, what if Jinshi went along with you? And I'm like, you bitches, you both, Suiren and Gaoshun, they planned this out. Because I'm pretty sure that Jinshi was just going to go into town. Jinshi was just going to go into town. No big deal. Go find his answers. But then when Gaoshun's like, MaoMao's going home, she could go with you. And he's like, yes, please. And the thing about it is, this didn't involve the use of the hairpin. She still has that hairpin that she could cash in if she wanted to. But instead, they just went because it was a technicality. I'm like, oh, And she's like, oh. And the thing about it is, MaoMao not wanting to travel with him, I think is for a lot of reasons. One, she doesn't want to get her foster father involved too much, but girl, he's going to figure it out after everything you told him. Like he was putting the dots together. I'm surprised. I won't be surprised if he doesn't ask Lakan about it when he sees him next time. I won't be surprised. But he clearly is going to put two and two together. I feel like she didn't want him to know about Lakan. I mean, she doesn't want to take a man home to see her foster dad. And she also doesn't want him like barging into her private life, which she's totally fine with having that opinion. But also, by the end of this episode, I felt like she thought he was going to one of the brothels and was just trying to sneak in to get some like Pleasure Town stuff going on. And I'm like, girl, no, that's not it at all. The miscommunication of these two. But yeah, so they're like, you'll go, won't you? And she's like, oh God, he likes this idea too. And she's like, oh, well, I don't know if we should go or not. But then they end up going. And then Suiren's like, well, if Jinshi is going to go in this disguise, you should be disguised as well. She is so terrifying. Suiren is legit terrifying. She's like, here's my daughter's robe. Let's go. And MaoMao's like, oh my God, I guess. She's like, I have a bad feeling about this. So they go into town and he dubs the name Jinka, which the ka means flower. And she's just like, I guess. I guess that name works. And she's like, fine. And so she's like, why does he look like he's enjoying this? And it's like, because he's getting to spend the day with you and go on a date with you. And it's just you and him. That's why. I like that Basin follows. I wonder if Basin and Gaoshun are related, because Basin being promoted to being like public babysitter is hilarious. And Jinshi knows that he's there. He's like, look, I'm on a date. And Basin's like, I want some chicken skewers out of this. Thank you. Please and thank you. So yeah, this feels like a walk around town. Jinshi's having the time of his life. And she's just like, I like that she makes fun of him. She's like, you really have no clue how to be a commoner. You don't know street smarts at all. And I'm like, girl, he doesn't know street smarts at all. He has a muscular physique. He looks like he's trained with swords. He said he went to training camp, which is something eunuchs don't do. You're smart, girl. Put it together. It's like, he's never been a commoner. What can we do with that? And she's just, oh, girl. I do like Basin following along, though. But it was really cute. It had like an Aladdin feel to it, where he's just walking around town. I like that. He's like, oh, I'm going to a restaurant just outside the pleasure district. And she's like, okay. So then I like the fact that she's trying to grocery shop. And he's like, well, would a lady in waiting do that? And she's like, oh, no, she wouldn't. My favorite part about this is when they're walking around, Jinshi is kind of like a social person. He likes talking with people. And part of his job requires him to do that a lot. And, on a date, you want to talk to the person you're on a date with. Jinshi thinks this is a date. And so he wants to talk to MaoMao. MaoMao does not view this as a date. She just views it almost like she has to drag him along. And she's like, I got to go get food for my dad. I want to make sure to feed him. And she talks about how he's the type of person that takes care of everyone else but himself. And that he's really selfless. She's like, he's a good doctor and stuff. He could have a nice place. But she's like, he has no sense of profit or loss. My thing is, I feel like Loman lives in that shack and doesn't keep a lot of wealth because he wants to keep a low profile. He doesn't want the Empire to think he's doing something inappropriate, especially if they exiled him. And so he's keeping a low profile, and he doesn't want attention drawn to him because it could put MaoMao in danger. That's just my theory about it, but who knows? And so she's like, if he was on the verge of starvation, the old lady would probably force feed something to him. But the best part is that Jinshi, he's like, he's kind of like, she's just walking around. And MaoMao is in her own head. She's not thinking at all about Jinshi, but she's not trying to be rude. She's just thinking about her dad and like, what do I do next? And what do I do after we get done meeting at this restaurant? And Jinshi mistakes it for her being cold to him. And he's like, well, we're not talking about anything. And she's like, there's nothing to talk about. He's just like, Murr. The face that he makes whenever she's like, what are we supposed to talk about? It's just a grumpy face. He's like, I want to talk about something. He is. There are times where Jinshi acts so smooth and suave and sleek, but then there are times he's such a kid. He's such a child. He's like a kid that's toy won't play with him. And it's so funny. And she's like, okay. She's like, I'll solve the problem. Food brings everybody together. And her little face where she like smiles and it's like, chicken skewers, tee-hee. And the way that she smiles at him and the way he smiles back with the little blush, shut your face. Shut your freaking face. With his big puffy squirrel cheeks and all. It's adorable. And then when he grabs the chicken skewer, he like wraps his hand around her arm, around hers. Shut up. Shut up, y'all. That's amazing. So she's like, you can't get this in the palace. I love it's kind of like fair food. She's like, you can go to the fanciest, swankiest, you know, you can eat at Buckingham Palace or whatever, but sometimes you just need a corn dog. You know, sometimes you can have all the 5-star Michelin meals that you want, but sometimes you just crave a funnel cake and you just got to go to the fair and get some greasy food. And that's all you want. It's so cute. And he takes the cotton out and eats it. I like that Basin's like, I want some chicken skewers too, please. He's like, it's better than I remember at camp. And she's like, camp? Well, that was for soldiers, not eunuchs. And I'm like, girl, put 2 and 2 together. She's like, okay. Meanwhile, so Suiren is like cleaning out all the toys that he had and talking about how, you know, he'd get irritated about not getting a certain toy and you'd, you know, cheer him up till you found him a new one. And he's like, well, fixating on one thing is not a luxury that Jinshi is allowed to have. So I think Gao Shu knows that Jinshi is treading over very thin ice because he doesn't get the luxury of having something to himself, even if it's a person. So Gao Shu knows that things are like, if the wrong people find out, it could ruin things for Jinshi. And that makes me very nervous, right? I don't know how the Emperor would feel about it. I don't know. The thing about MaoMao is she doesn't swoon over him like other women would. So if the Emperor like watched the two of them in a room together, he'd probably think MaoMao wasn't interested. And they'd be like, okay. So I feel like that's the one aspect. While we, the audience, want to see them get together so badly, the thing that keeps them together in this show is her detachment. So I can't complain too much about it, but I feel for Jinshi so much because I project a lot on him. So then she's like, well, aren't you supposed to be meeting someone? And he's like, well, you just want to get away from me as soon as possible. And the thing about it is, she does want to get away from him, but it's not because she doesn't like him. It's because she wants to go back and get some groceries for her dad. And I'm glad that she finally tells him. She's like, yeah, she's like, because he stands back and he's like, well, he's like, do you just want to get away from me because the palace life is bad? And MaoMao's like, where does this come from? She's like, no. She's like, this isn't like when I left last time. Also, when it cuts back to Basin and he has like 3 skewers and he's like chowing down from afar, ridiculous. And he's like, well, I think that life in the palace is better than life out in the pleasure district. And she's like, well, it's not bad. She's like, but I worry about my dad. She's like, I left for work of my own free will. And it's nice there, but I worry about my father who I left all alone. And he's like, oh, and Jinshi, you know, is like, I didn't expect you to care about a family member because you only seem to be interested in medicine or poison. And she's like, well, he's like literally the main person I care outwardly about the most. And then she gets kind of mad at him and he's like, well, he also was my teacher, you know. I need him to stay alive. I like that she kind of like, she doesn't admit immediately that she loves him, but she's like, oh, well, he's also an apothecary, so I need to keep learning from him. Thank you. A very Sherlock response to be like non-emotional about it. And he's like, oh, well, he must be quite skilled if he taught you. And she's like, he knows not only Eastern, but also Western medicine as well. He studied abroad in the West when he was young. And Jinshi's like, oh, well, the only way for him to study in the West is if he got, you know, permission from the Empire. And she's like, yeah, He's very talented. Like, she's not connecting the dots that this is going to let Jinshi know who she's talking about. He's like, well, why is he working in the pleasure district? She's like, well, it must be because he's short on luck. I'm like, girl, no. The fact that MaoMao doesn't know why he works there, she's just like, oh, he must just be unlucky. And I'm like, oh, no, girl. He got exiled from the palace. And I'm sure there's a reason he's working at that brothel. I'm sure there's a reason. It's probably tied to you. It's probably tied to your mom. It's probably tied to Lakan. Who knows? We'll probably find out before the end of this season. Hopefully. But yeah, she's like, he was given 2 talents, but lost his manhood. And that's when Jinshi's like, wait a minute. She's like, your dad's a eunuch? And she's like, uh-huh. She's like, yes. And he's like, so... And he's like sitting there thinking, she's like, oh, she's like, I guess the brothel style joke didn't land. And then she's like, because of his study abroad, he was made a eunuch by the previous Empress Dowager, the former emperor's mother. That part's interesting to me. I don't know why he was made a eunuch because of his studies abroad. What that would mean, unless they just were nervous that he would try something. That part there didn't make sense, but I'm sure this series has a habit of just putting something out there and then coming back and explaining it later. Or we know that MaoMao is not the most reliable narrator. She has a lot of gaps in what she knows. So it's very possible that Lakan or Loman or someone's going to explain it later in more detail. But I found it interesting that, one, because he studied abroad, he was castrated, meaning that he was an adult when it happened. Okay. But 2, I also thought it was interesting that it was the Dowager Empress who ordered it, not the emperor himself. So that part was interesting to me as well. So I'm like, okay. And he's like, a eunuch, an apothecary, and a doctor. And she's like, did I fail to mention that? And then she's like, oh, is that where you're supposed to go? And it's like a restaurant that's frequented by a bunch of courtesans. So like, I get why he had to disguise himself. And so then I feel like she draws the wrong conclusion, right? Because she looks back over to him and she's like, well, you could have just come to the pleasure district if you wanted to see someone. And he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, what do you mean? And she says, nothing. I'm like, girl, you don't understand why he's there. That's not the reason. And he's like, well, do you know the regulars at the Verdigris house? And I like that he calls her apothecary instead of JAUNT or MaoMao. And she's like, well, I know the customers that stand out. And he tries to get her to put him in contact with them. And she's like, oh, no. She's like, I have a vow of confidentiality. I can't just hook you up with them. Plus, it costs you a lot of money. So then Jinshi's like, well, fine. He's like, then how does one decrease the value of a courtesan? And that look she gives him was chilling. It's too much of a close-up to be the thumbnail, or I would make it the thumbnail. But that look she gives him is like, it's Lakan. It's a cold-hearted stare. Like, oh. And she says, that is an unpleasant question. Because she knows it's probably tied to her mom. And so then she explains, she goes, fine, since you don't seem to know. She's like, there are many ways, especially with high-class courtesans. She's like, at the Verdigris house, girls take the most important lessons while working as servants. So like we see the one princess teaching them all to play the instrument. At that time, they're separated into those with beautiful appearances and those without. So I instantly think of Memoirs of a Geisha a little bit, because I always think of the one girl like Pumpkin, who is not the prettiest. So she kind of like, I think she sells herself out instead of her talents. Whereas Chio is able to sell her talents. And it says the latter, who don't have the talent, are, after debuting, immediately take on customers and basically are like prostitutes, essentially. Also, want to give this series a shout out for its tasteful use of suggestive material. They show a lot of sexy scenes in this part here, but none of it is gratuitous. It's all implied. You get what they're selling you. Kudos to the animation team for not making it gratuitous and weird. Yep. And she says those with talent, however, are taught the tea ceremony and given higher education, which they use to entertain patrons, and their prices go up and up. So basically, if you're smart and talented, you have a chance to not sell your body immediately and basically sell your talents. But those who don't have that talent and just have their looks are basically like prostitutes. So, and then once high enough, they start to appear only very rarely. And at that point, you get a top-ranking courtesan who costs a year's salary just to have tea with. And that's when we see the one courtesan with like her robes off. And I don't know if that's supposed to be MaoMao's mother there, but with the little pipe, we'll see. Because if it's the pipe, I'm like, does it have to do with, is it the pipe? Is that pipe that she's holding with the curtains? Is that the one that Lakan planted? I don't know. Also, speaking of symbolism, when we have the ones, some retain their chastity until the day that they're bought out, which means the one guy buys them and they go off with them to live happily ever after, supposedly. But then we see the hand crushing the flower. I love that the abuse and violence towards women is represented by crushing of flowers. Like it's visual, it's symbolic, you get it. Yep. And she says their value comes from their purity. Which MaoMao's pretty pure, other than her arm. It's like losing that purity would half their value. And in addition, a pregnancy would reduce it to nearly nothing. And the way she's so cold when she says that to him is like suggesting that she, if she came from such pregnancy, basically reduced her mother's value to nothing. And of course, Jinshi, who is surprised by all of this sexual assault and things happening to these women, is just baffled by it. He's like, what? What do you mean? And it's like, you didn't notice that before, sir? You didn't put two and two together? I love the idea that you just have like the ground underneath and it's just their feet. I'm like, did you not get that? So hopefully that saves him the trip to the brothel now that he's figured out the potential truth, right? I'm really curious what we're going to do now. If they're going to go back and what's going to happen. This episode was super cute. And I want to go back and rewatch it because it was adorable. And seeing the two of them hang around was really fun. And I loved it. But I'm more excited next week to see Jinshi go back and being like, what'd you do, sir? And to see what we're going to get with that. So anyway, I hope y'all enjoyed this reaction and discussion. I'm curious to know your thoughts down below, but I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back real soon with more reactions.